We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cyber Reason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cyber Reason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP.
And welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly. Hey, Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. That's in Florida. We are excited to announce our complete lineup of speakers, which is Leslie Carhart, John Strand, Alyssa Miller, Dave Kennedy, O'Shea Bowens, Marina Chiavata, Patrick Coble, Chris Eng, Eric Escobar, Nick Leghorn, Michael Schlatt, Kevin Johnson, Justin Kohler, Jay Beal, Trevin Ivey, and Ryan Cobb. You can learn all about our speakers and about the conference details by going to securityweekly.com/unlocked. Of course, you can register there and plan on joining us. Also, if you've missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they're available for your viewing pleasure on demand at, interestingly and coincidentally enough, securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, so before we took the break, we were starting to sort of naturally migrate to, what do we do about this? And the question was asked of Jim by Scott. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing, what do we do about this? I wanted to frame it a little bit because, listening to the discussion in the first segment, I kept thinking back to my government days, my DoD days, where I worked for an organization for the bulk of that time whose title was information security. But just in general, working for a top secret, have to have a clearance type of three-letter agency, a lot of the stuff that we've talked about was addressed in terms of the what do you do about it. I had to have a polygraph to work where I worked in order to get a top secret clearance, and the polygraph covered three different sort of topics, broad topics. It was three. One was lifestyle. What do you do in your day to day that could get you in trouble and could make you vulnerable? Back in those days, it was mostly vulnerable to blackmail, which would be an outsider manipulating you, to put it more in our context. One was sort of political affiliations. Do you have anything that might make you a hacktivist in today's terms? Political motivations for, back in these days, it was committing espionage. And then the third element was more, financial of nature. What are your finances? What are you doing in terms of, do you have a lot of debt? Or do you have a gambling problem? Things like that. So, that was one element. I had to go through a psych exam to be hired. The polygraph was done every 5 years. We had this idea of compartmentalization, which some might call today segmentation. Not everybody needed to know everything. The people that were working on the Soviet Union problem didn't need to be read into and working on the China problem, and so on and so forth. So there was lots of things that were done, and in an historical context, it was to prevent espionage, because there had been espionage cases where people were turned and subverted, and I dare say we might have done that to them in order to recruit others. And I'm seeing a lot of parallels, and even I mentioned the PCI thing because we're going to talk about how do we prevent, how do we fix this, how do we mitigate or minimize the damage, and so on and so forth. And part of the problem is there's a lot in PCI that addresses this, but it's not explicit. And somebody said in the first segment that I think it was Scott that said our companies that we work with, they don't know why they're doing stuff. They're just they do what the words say, but they don't understand the meaning. They don't understand.
They don't think
context.
outside the box. They can't look beyond. Sorry, Jeff. No, they can't. No, and I'm not saying all companies, but some of them can't look beyond the paragraph. That's what it says, and that's what I'm going to do. either because that's the CISO's take or maybe somebody above the CISO. I remember one of my classes I had, the gentleman said, Jim, we're only doing insider threat per the NISPOM conforming change 2, and we're not doing anything else. I said, but you've already really been doing this. And I explained it. And then he goes, well, I said, there's a requirement for you to put in an insider threat program, but you've been dealing with employee problems. To really mitigate the problem, you've got to go beyond it. We're only doing compliance. Well, I'd like to see where that company is today. Hopefully nothing's happened, but I'm not saying, I think people have this big thing that if you go beyond compliance, it's going to cost money. Not necessarily. Jeff, one of the first things I did,
I don't think it's, I think saying going beyond compliance is a little bit simplistic and potentially misleading. It's not as much, and I agree at some level, but I think there's more to it than that. I think it has a lot more to do with what we're talking about, the lack of understanding of the context and how things thread together, and the deeper meaning, what we like to call the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. Right. In some contexts. I don't think you disagree with that, but
you have to understand the problem, Jeff, to really break it down and really to mitigate it. I guess I'm agreeing with you, is that you really have to understand the depth of the problem. Your company really, or organization, has to decide how much of this they want to tackle, right? Is workplace violence going to be part of your insider threat mitigation strategy, or is that going to be a separate department? Is this going to be part of your insider threat program? I remember a gentleman in my class said, listening to you, Jim, I don't know why we're going to have a separate workplace violence program. Workplace violence can be committed by the outside, but a lot of times it's committed by people on the inside. So why am I going to have a separate insider threat program and a separate workplace violence program? Let's integrate it. So, a lot of times some of this is just some clear thinking rather than just, I need to mitigate insider threats. I get that a lot. And I say, well, what is insider threats to you? And sometimes you'll get that blank stare. And so I'll usually pull out the right,
like we're all doing now.
Sorry, I love that. You're so right. Sometimes you just get I don't know, I haven't really thought about it. And then by the way, just for purposes of discussion, what I do at that point is I go, okay, what are the things that insider threat could hurt you with? Because I got to start there, because they're like, well, I don't know. And it's like, okay, have we done information classification? No. Okay, we're not even ready for insider threat yet. That kind
of thing. Here's another one I bring up. Have you done a data inventory?
Asset inventory, data inventory. Absolutely. Yeah. We're on the same page, man. Yeah, and you know what you're working with. Because if you don't, we need to start there.
Look, listen, looking in my crystal ball that I have here in front of me, it's telling me that insider threat is not going to be solved for another 15 years. So, Jim, you're on the right path here, right? What can companies do? That's what I was asking as we let out the
and to paraphrase that question, what the hell are you talking about? Insider threat program? What is that? What do they do? What does it look like?
Well, let's first start out with try to make this simple. Most companies have been dealing with employee problems. Let's just call them employees right now. Whether they're coming to work drunk, whether they're stealing, whether they're clicking on a phishing link, they're doing something that could harm the organization. This is sort of the same analogy I used when I started teaching all the defense contractors years ago. You've been doing this. You're acting like putting in a program is something new. A program is meant that you're going to gather, integrate, and share information that could be indicative of a potential actual insider threat. A lot of words there, but that means gather information on Jim that may indicate he's a threat to the organization. I would ask my students, haven't you been gathering information before this requirement came out and talking to HR and talking to security? They're like, yeah. And I said, well, in a way, you've been doing insider threat. The whole insider threat program concept is you have a manager that's dedicated to putting in an insider threat program. That manager works with all the other stakeholders. The stakeholders could be security, the CSO, the CISO, the CIO, the network admin. Of course, we know each company structure is different. Physical security. And when an incident happens, you're gathering your stakeholders, getting the nuggets of information. Remember, an insider threat program manager, those people don't work for him. He's almost like a liaison, trying to get those other departments to share the data and not hold on to it. Quite honestly, what happens in a lot of companies, I'm still seeing it to today, yesterday when I did some training. Departments are reluctant to share something, let's say on Scott. IT has something. So does the physical security people. The boss knows something. The simple example I use, which resonates with most people, is Bob is sitting in the cubicle. Bob's had a bad performance review. It's his second one. He's really upset. Okay? There's a guy sitting in the cubicle next to him. Let's say it's you, Jeff. And you've got some kind of training and that you realize that Bob is somewhat of a threat. He's disgruntled. So let's say you go to HR. And you say, hey, HR, he's not my best buddy, but he's sitting on the phone to his wife every day, dropping the 4-letter word. He's really upset about that missed promotion, negative performance review. So I say to my students, what could HR do? Tell them to stop cussing. No, let's go with the insider threat mitigation, insider threat program concept. We dig deeper. So the HR person goes to the insider threat program manager and says, we've got a problem with Bob. What's the problem? Had a negative performance review. Now, the order I'm going to go in doesn't have to be this way. The insider threat program manager goes to security. Hey, security, what can you tell me about Bob? What are his working hours? Oh, Bob's coming in every Sunday from about 11 to 1, comes in every Tuesday night from about 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. Oh, really? You go back to, so now the insider threat program manager goes back to Bob's supervisor. Hey, Bob's supervisor, did you know he's working these hours? No. Okay. All right. Now you go over to, let's hypothetically say, the IT department. What can you tell me about Bob? Well, he's looking for a new job. He's clearly disgruntled. I mean, through web surfing tools, you can determine that. Oh, let's say the company has the ability to look at print jobs. Oh, he's burning up the printer. Oh, he's plugging in USBs. So you go from just a guy sitting in a cubicle that may be upset with a performance review and dropping the F-bomb to more than likely, Houston, you got a disgruntled employee that may be walking out the door or is in the process of exfiltrating data from your organization. Is that, I know that's a long-winded explanation, but it resonates with most of my students. It's you're taking all those little nuggets and trying to create what I call the more accurate picture, if that makes sense.
You know, it does, and you're really addressing the physical aspect of insider threat, but there's also a logical aspect, and I think Jeff, tell me if I'm wrong here, or Johnny, or somebody. Ekron Systems was a sponsor of Security Weekly of Security Weekly at some point. I think I remember that.
Yeah,
they were. Yeah. They sponsored us. Yeah.
And so you know, there are physical, technical means that you have to put together as part of your program, right, Jim?
Yes, and that's all part of it. The only problem that sometimes I have, and I don't mean this against Ekran or any of the vendors, is that they're looking at it a lot of times from usually a more technical perspective. It doesn't mean that something that they catch on the wire can't be indicative of something they're going to do that's non-technical, like, you know, they just detect an email that says this, but most of the vendors I see, they're selling a tool to catch stuff on the wire. I have tried to work with so many of these vendors, and I don't have to name them. You're just selling a tool. Sell the tool, sell the training for the tool, but integrate me into it. And I do have some companies that are still interested. I've been pushing. It's like sell fixing the bigger problem, not just putting a tool on a network. But that's how just some of these tool companies are. They just want to sell a tool. And so I think
at what point, Jim, at what point do we sit back and say that, our employers monitoring us is an invasion of privacy?
Well, Scott, as long as we've known each other, wouldn't you agree before insider threat, this whole thing took off? Companies have been monitoring networks.
Mm-hmm.
When I worked at the water company in 2002, we were using, if you said the name, it was one of the Barracuda, one of those way back, that you could monitor people, where are they surfing? Of course, we found employees surfing porn sites, surfing places they didn't. So where I'm going with it, the tools have been there and networks have been monitored. That's why you've had login banners that have said blah, 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 blah. That's why you've signed acceptable use agreements. Now, is everybody still there?
We're here.
Yeah, we're still
listening.
here.
Okay, sorry. So I've had these discussions, Scott, with lawyers when I've gone out and sat down with, the whole slew of stakeholders, and we've gone around the room and I've, said, look, this isn't to be argumentative. I'm an outsider coming in to help you. There are going to be some challenging and engaging discussions. And one time the attorney said to me, well, Jim, this is an invasion of privacy. I said, sir, please don't get mad at me. Respect all your, time you've put into becoming a lawyer, but have you been monitoring the network? And he looks at the CIO, and the guy's like, yeah. Have you been monitoring for employee actions such as USB insertions, uploading stuff to the cloud, surfing for porn? Yes. I said, so in essence, you've been monitoring for insider threat. And the CIO agreed. So I looked at the lawyer, said, so where's the invasion of privacy? Unless I'm looking at attorney-client privilege, unless I'm looking at Jim has a health problem and I'm sharing that health problem with the insider threat program manager and all the stakeholders and going, this is why Jim is acting up because he's got a medical condition. Does that make sense, Scott?
It does.
Scott, let me just ask a quick question. So to Jim. So Jim, I've got two questions for you and to look at. One is, why does media sensationalism get organizations to focus more on the digital and forget physical, or they transfer and focus on physical and forget about the digital aspect about the insider threat? And then number two, it's an add-on to what Scott said before about the potential of invading in privacy. And that is, I've got a scenario that a friend of mine let me know that a large law firm basically installed cameras in the halls in the offices and so forth to look for various different things. And a lot of their employees thought, hey, this is a potential invasion of privacy. But what they actually caught was janitorial services walking out the door at night with actual documents that were being given to organized crime for up-and-coming cases. Those kind of scenarios, right? So, but that, again, it goes back to what you were saying before. Somebody paid somebody who was on a janitorial service, came in, did something, and the only how they caught it was the person came out, was looking all nice and thin, and came out, and he looked all fat because he had it underneath his T-shirts and so forth. But, again, going back to, so answer those two questions, but to kind of more from a strategic standpoint to get people to start thinking outside the box is what you mentioned earlier in part one.
Well, the example you're giving there, I mean, could you classify that as that obviously that janitorial service was a trusted business provider to the law firm, right? So, I mean, was a background check run on these people, or were they just hired? I brought up a similar, when I did a consulting gig one time, I was just sitting there with the insider threat program manager and we were just BSing. And don't ask me how we got on the subject, but we were talking about the keyloggers. And I said, so what would happen if a janitorial service, your janitorial service asked for the Wi-Fi password? Would you give it to them? And they said, sure, why? Why not? I said, well, let me give you a scenario. Of course, after they give them the scenario, they thought twice. I said, somebody has paid the janitorial service, and I don't know in your particular incidents if they were selling this stuff to the organized crime or organized crime was paying them to get it. But what my scenario was, I brought up, was that somebody was paying these janitorial people who somebody knew they had access, let's say it was, quite a bit of money, to put keyloggers on all the computers. Well, there's a couple different kinds of keyloggers. There's the one you just put in, you got to go back and get. Then there's the one I talked about. It emails you all the keystrokes. So all as the insider, cleaning crew has to do is configure these things to connect to the company's Wi-Fi. Why? Because the company gave the janitorial service the Wi-Fi, and then out goes all the keystrokes. It doesn't get any easier than that. I guess that's. Would you consider that an insider threat? I guess I'm asking you back.
Well, it is, right? It can be. But again, I look at janitorial services as being, the trusted advisor, but also needs to be parameters, like you said before. How often do they background checks? Hold the company liable in the sense of, one organization I've worked with, this is many, many years ago, they actually outsourced it, and they made sure that it was the same supervisor and the same staff, that if there was going to be a change in any of the staff for whatever reason, to let them notify the organization so they can perform a background check. And if they didn't meet the criteria that they met, they weren't allowed on site. And that's where I've seen where they've gone to that extent to make sure that the person that they bring in is trusted, no matter if it's the same supervisor, they're held accountable, and then go through the process. Whereas other times they'll say, yeah, we do it. And then you're watching and you come in and you look, especially for clean desk policy, the easiest way to walk past a firewall, the easiest way into a network is to walk past the firewall, is to see how many times people have got pieces of paper lying around that could have sensitive data on it, whether it's taken with a camera, because everything's all small and nimble now, but nobody pays attention to that stuff as you go through. So there's many different ways of looking at it, whether it's a keylogger, simple passing through, even to the point of I was doing a clean desktop policy and finding out that when they had a locked door, the janitorial service was going in, and inside that office had everything from you could think of. So security numbers, credit card information, everything all laid open for anybody to view, because the company had the store, hey, it's behind a locked door, nobody sees it. But janitorial services was an outside service coming in and had keys to those doors and see everything on that table. And that to me was a major risk, because it's something that couldn't have been identified, because they had this perception because of a physical door being there to block general populace from being able to access that data.
There was a study done, and I don't know if you saw it. It was done back in 2016. I think there was a study done that was sponsored by it was 3M, and am I pronouncing this right, Scott? Phone F-O-P-H-O-N, Phone.
Yeah.
So it was a global study, of course, giving kudos to 3M. They were trying to sell their screen privacy filters. But what this was a global study on visual hacking. And they basically sent a liaison into a company, and the purpose was to see what they could actually get out of the company. It was pretty mind-blowing. Of course, the person that went in looked like a regular employee. Other than the liaison at the company, nobody knew that this person was basically an outsider / visual hacker. And his job was to see what he could find on desks, computer screens. The results were pretty mind-blowing. Most people didn't challenge the person. The person was able to simply walk out the door with stuff. So this goes back to this whole thing of, I think back, Jeff, to the days when I worked in a SCIF, and you either had an open SCIF or a closed SCIF. And, I can think back to the time that I had to go to the security guy and I said, you got the security roster for 400 people sitting there. He's like, so it's an open SCIF. I said, we have a cleaning crew that comes in here, don't we? He goes, yeah. I said, are they escorted? He goes, no, they don't have to be. I said, you've got 400 pieces of PII sitting right there. I'm not criticizing you on you doing your job. I'm simply bringing up what an employee told me when they came to your desk and they noticed the rosters. And he goes, well, I could put a privacy sheet on it. I said, a PII cover sheet. I said, well, I'm going to be smart. Well, why don't you just announce it's privacy information? You have everything right there for identity theft. You have my name, my social, my address, all my clearance stuff. You've got everything you need for credit card fraud, identity theft. The bottom line is he took my recommendations and he put the stuff in the drawer. Jeff, I'm just thinking back to something you said about the simplicity with getting data out. It's mind blowing sometimes that, I worked in a SCIF, and I'm sorry I'm jumping away from the other question, but I'm just thinking of some other things. I'm working in a SCIF doing insider threat, and here sits two printers, one on the left and one on the right. The one on the left is classified. The one on the right is not. I could simply print out the print job that was classified, go over to the multi-function printer, fax it and email it, and the computer on the right that was connected to the internet had no authentication. I could do the same thing, print it on a top secret printer, go over to the fax machine that had no authentication. I mean, the vulnerabilities were sitting there staring us in the face. And not to beat up on my colleagues, but they were all counterintelligence people writing up strategies and all. And I'm sitting here as a IA physical security guy going, this stuff is staring us right in the face, right?
Sneaker net, it gets around everything.
Well, it's funny. Yeah, I had this thought in the first segment. Who'd we lose? Did we lose Jim again? Oh, that was me. The camera, Twitch cams. That's camera one, camera two. I was thinking in the first segment, over the weekend, I watched a lot of, stuff about the 9/11, the 20th anniversary. Part nostalgia, part to honor those that are lost, part, I just felt obligated. Like I should watch this stuff and pause. But, they kept saying, I heard repeatedly the phrase that, when they published the results of the commission, how did this happen? How could this possibly happen? I heard this phrase often, and I keep thinking of it as we're talking. Why is this so hard? It's because I think the same thing that happened with the whole 9/11 thing. The failures were lack of imagination, is what I heard most often, but there's actually 4 conclusions: lack of imagination, policy, capabilities, and management. But I think the key is the lack of imagination. And I can remember, being a security consultant, being in the private sector before 9/11, going into companies and trying to convince them why they should do security if they were going to plug their, corporate network into the internet as a backbone. Why they might want to have a firewall, why they might want to do something in terms of network security, and telling them so many times, look, we're security professionals, we're hackers, we know what can be done, we know what all the bad is. You should trust us, you should believe us. This could happen, this could happen, this could happen. Planes hit a building, and for a brief period of time, all of a sudden our companies were like, oh, now we understand what you're talking about. Things could happen that we're not thinking about.
But yes, in a way, I feel like we're back to the way, in some cases with cyber, we've let our guard down. I just want to, I wrote this up yesterday for a class I'm doing, and I call it the Malicious Insider Threat Playbook of Tactics. And I've got to write, some individuals know security threats exist to what depth. Other individuals only know what they know, and in some cases become complacent with their knowledge. And that's not a knock. Other individuals think because they have a security certification, they're experts. Well, of course, security certifications are a baseline. Some companies, I feel, get relaxed about security threats, let their guard down, and just in some cases, they have a relaxed security posture. And that, to me, to really understand security problems, both cyber, data loss, insider threat, we go back to, you got to think outside the box. And you, just like you're saying, Jeff, and you that working in the government, that's what I saw, is that sometimes the problems were staring us right in the face, yet you're a contractor, nobody wanted to listen to you, you had a conspiracy theory, you something. But, I mean, the horror stories I could tell, I could go on and on working in the government. And I mean, I was quoted, I guess I'm bragging here, but I was quoted by not quoted, I gave a presentation a couple years ago on the spy gear and covert listening devices and how easy it is for a malicious insider to exfiltrate information and data from a company. So I gave my presentation. It was very well received. I get an email from somebody senior in the government that goes over to the FBI, and it said, in light of, I don't know if you guys remember the story about the lady with the spy pin in the skiff, Omarosa, bugging General Flynn. And it basically said, in light of Mr. Henderson's presentation at the Insider Threat Symposium and Expo, I think we need to give his presentation more than lip service. The threat is real. And I'm like, oh, wow. Now somebody's listening, right? But that's, I think, the problem is we just get complacent. Businesses are focused too much as on the outside. They don't know where to really put their their mitigation strategy. Scott, you're probably better to answer that. What do you feel? Do you feel it's more focused on the outside? Do you feel companies are starting to look more at the inside problem? What's your thought?
No, companies are still struggling to make sales. Right.
Yeah.
The number one, and all of us here on SCW have gone round and round and round on this one as well. The number one problem for most businesses is making sales. They don't have time to focus on anything else but making sales. And it oftentimes blinds those companies to the threats that are either internal or external.
No, Scott, I agree. I tried a couple years ago to get all the insider threat detection tool vendors. I don't have to mention their names. If they're listening, they know who they are. And my goal was to have a one-day symposium and have all the vendors come in. I would start out by talking like we're talking now. What is insider threat? Yes, it's non-technical, it's technical. Okay, I want you to get up there. Let's say, Scott, you have a tool, and I want you to do a demo. I want you to take questions. I want it to be more than a sales pitch. I want the users to see what your tool can do and take questions. But the guidelines were that if company A came in first and then company B, then C, D, and F, there would be no bashing saying that my AI is better, my algorithm is better. They were all concerned about, well, what happened if somebody stays from the company and sees my presentation? I'm like, what do you care? If you have a really cool feature, then show it to the people. Nobody wanted to do it. I mean, right there, that gave me a clear indication, like you're saying, they just want to make sales. They didn't want to be in front of a whole bunch of people asking questions about insider threats. I mean, I've been, Scott, I had a meeting a couple years ago as part of the NITSIG. That's the value of the NITSIG. And I had banks, I had major defense contractors. I had a house there too. And the discussion was on insider threat detection tools. And the outcome, we had about 16 people, was mind-blowing. Of the tools are expensive. You better ask the right questions. You better get the support contracts. So I'm not saying that tools aren't good, but a lot of this is, let's fix a problem. I mean, we've seen this, you probably would agree, Scott, Jeff, and everybody, with cyber tools. Buy a cyber tool, it'll fix the problem. Buy an insider threat tool, and it'll fix the problem.
See that all too often. Let's fix the problem by throwing money at it. That always solves the problem.
And it's not.
It's like media sensationalism, right?
Do you, Scott, remember this is probably one of the better articles I saw, Scott, and you probably remember this article was written back in. Give me a minute here. I want to pull it up. And it was, I thought it was an interesting article on, it was written, do you remember the guy named Lance Spitzer? Does that ring a bell?
That name. It rings a bell. Yeah. I don't know why.
So the article was patching the human operating system against cyber threats. And it said, over the years, there's been much debate on who causes more damages, insider or outsiders. While network intrusion and ransomware attacks may be costly and damaging, so the actions of employees that sit behind firewalls. So it was interesting because he went on to say, if you compare how much organizations invest in securing their computers' networks versus how much effort they put into teaching employees how to safeguard information, you'd be stunned at the difference. He said, what has your organization done to secure the human operating system? Nothing, not much. In many cases, the human operating system is stuck in the days of Windows 95. There is no firewall on by default. All the services are enabled, and then human operating system is happy to click for anyone that asks. It's pretty much true today, isn't it?
It is true, and we're going to need to wrap up here in a moment. This is a recurrent theme in our industry, and the bottom line is, because companies don't have understanding and institutional knowledge, or to some degree care, and we can argue that till the cows come home, the default that the industry promotes is there's a technological solution for everything. I've lately been thinking about, the whole aspect of people, process, and technology that is often bandied about as, the three legs of the stool of information or cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. And I've come to the conclusion personally that, the vast majority of the industry focuses on the technology solution. What do I need to buy? Where do I need to put it? What color should the
that'll make it easier?
And then I'm done. There's some amount of emphasis put on basically what you were just saying. The weakest link is people. I don't disagree with that, but I think I've focused the majority of my career and would argue that at the end of the day, the most important leg of the stool and what's done the least or has the least amount of focus is the process side of things. But that's like a whole discussion for a whole nother day. Jim, if you could just summarize briefly, just give us like three to five takeaways of, where do we start as organizations that want to think about, putting in, installing, or doing something in the area of addressing insider threat. Where do we start? Just, give us a brief teaser, and then we need to wrap.
I'll go through my last couple slides here that I have on my deck. So creating a comprehensive insider threat mitigation framework. Really, it starts with support from the CEO down. You've got to have the CISO, the CSO, the CIO, IT, everybody on board.
All right, management buy-in. Next.
Right. You're approaching security from a holistic enterprise perspective, not from a siloed. The other problem is departments or individuals, when it comes to insider threat, have to stop the judge and jury mentality that's going to limit and hamper the organization's ability to detect and mitigate employee threats, because somebody knows something here, somebody knows something here, but I can't share it. The whole purpose of an insider threat program, and on an insider threat program, you have, for the insider threat program people, you have code of conducts, non-disclosure, not the ones you sign for the company, but the ones you sign for being part of this group, which say up to and including termination. There was an agency that a friend of mine worked for. The people on the insider threat program went bad. It can happen. Yeah. So, there are checks and balances when you're putting in an insider threat program to prevent, witch hunting and all this. Basically, what it comes.
I'm sorry, Jim. You're my kind of teacher. Unfortunately, I have to cut you off. You like to provide context to what you're saying, which I love and appreciate. We do need to wrap, unfortunately.
Okay.
But I do want to thank you for joining us today, and as is often the case, we're just scratching the surface of what's a really deeper, very interwoven discussion that is just yet another facet of this industry that we're in. But I do want to thank you for joining us. As I said, hopefully we can have you back to continue the conversation at some point. Tune in next week. We're actually going to sort of indirectly be continuing this discussion. We have a guest that's going to talk to us about the dangers of activism turning into hacktivism, especially from an employee standpoint. So sort of a whole different element of insider threat. I am off tomorrow to get on a plane and go to GERCON and speak at a live conference. I'm looking forward to that. I hope
what you're talking to be on.
My talk is entitled "Hackers Are Neither Created Nor Destroyed," and that'll be at GurCon. I'm actually speaking on Thursday.
Where's GurCon?
GurCon is Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it is the 10th. GurCon.com. I will stay safe. I will have my N95 mask on, except for when I'm drinking whiskey and smoking cigars. But you know how it is.
Those are self-sterilizing. I mean, come on.
Absolutely. So that's going to wrap us for this week. Thank you, everyone. Liam, it was great to see you again. Josh and Scott, of course, and Jim, again, thank you. Until next time, stay safe, stay secure, stay compliant, keep building those bridges and tearing down those silos. We're out.